Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to consider if new shooters should first learn to shoot iron sights and then later on get into optics, or if they should go straight into optics. And one of my viewers brought this subject up for discussion in the comments section, which I thought was an excellent topic. I had kind of mentioned it before in various videos, but I wanted to kind of make this a headline item. So here's the thing, especially in this political environment, right, where you got Democrats and some Republicans trying to restrict gun rights, my priority, and I think the priority of you guys out there, should be to bring in as many new shooters into the gun community, okay? Because ultimately, the best way to preserve our gun rights is to make it in the interest of as many people as possible to want to protect and preserve the Second Amendment. Okay? And that's the reason why I became an instructor some 12 years ago. The backstory to that is I grew up in New York City. For the first, I guess, 30 years of my life, the Second Amendment really didn't mean anything to me because I was at a place where I couldn't own any guns, and that was done intentionally, right? Because I guess they figured, hey, if these people don't own guns, we don't allow them to own guns, they'll never know what they're missing, okay? So that's the part of the strategy of the anti-gunners. Don't let people have guns, don't give them access to guns, and then they won't care about having their Second Amendment rights denied. So as a person that grew up in New York City, at some point in my early 30s, a friend of mine invited me down to Texas. He had some property like this. I spent a week with him. We did a lot of shooting, and I'm like, wow, this is like the most awesome thing in the world. And then within 2 years, I was pretty much doing the same thing. I was buying property and having fun shooting. So at that point, right, something happened. I went from being a person that really didn't care so much about the Second Amendment, right, just because I had no interest in it, no vested interest in it. I was always pro-gun rights, but I had no real incentive to fight for the Second Amendment, right? To fight to preserve gun rights because I didn't have any guns. At best I would say I was pro-gun rights leaning. Okay, so at the point that I became a gun owner and started, had property and was shooting and having fun with it, right? I'm like, okay, now when they're talking about restricting gun rights, they're not talking about taking away somebody else's rights. They're talking about taking away my rights. Okay. So all of a sudden, the whole world changed, right? Now, the Second Amendment really meant something to me personal. So at that point, I realized that, hey, the best way to preserve the Second Amendment is to bring as many new shooters into the gun community as possible, right? We need to keep growing our numbers, which we have successfully been doing over the last 10 years. That is the reason why, even though Democrats pretty much control the White House, they control the full Congress, they really can't push new gun legislation through because they know they're going to lose seats in the red states, okay? That's why they're trying to push stuff through the ATF so they can, the people in those red states, the Democrats in those red states, can say, hey, it wasn't me, it was them over there at the ATF, okay? This is a winning strategy, bringing in new shooters, taking people that are not gun owners and turning them into gun owners. That is the best way to preserve the Second Amendment. So let's talk about my training experience, right? About 12 years ago, when I decided, hey, this is the way forward. This is the way, the way we're going to expand gun rights, get bring in new people, train them. I said, okay, I want to become a gun instructor now, right? So I went and I got all my certifications. I don't know, it took me about 2 years. I was training people with iron sights because 12 years ago, that was the main thing, right? The optics did exist, but it wasn't as common. So the first 6 years, I'm training people on iron sights. And typical situation, I would get called to a range to train a couple. The husband, it was usually the husband. Sometimes it was the wife too, but usually the husband was like, really into it. Like, yeah, he wanted to learn this. The wife, he kind of just brought the wife along to try it out as well. So the way it went that, training people on iron sights. Like 99% of the time, the guys got it, they enjoyed it, they loved it, no issues there. When the women tried it, only about 50% of the time did they actually enjoy doing it. The other 50% of the time, the women were like, this whole line up the sights, rear sight, front sight, sight picture, focus on the front sight, target at a distance, blurry. I mean, it was just like completely discombobulating them, right? Not all women, but about 50% of the time, it just seemed like too much work. Now, you might say, how is this too much work? Well, here's the thing. I mean, I find cooking to be too much work, okay? My wife does the cooking. I don't cook. I don't like cooking, You might say, how can you not like cooking? I don't. I like eating, obviously, right? But, yeah, I'm not into cooking. I'm into eating. So the same thing goes with the shooting, right? Sometimes, the whole with the line up the sights and, rear sight, front sight, match them up, get it underneath the target, focus on your front sight. About 50% of the time, the women kind of lost interest in it, and they were like, what, I'm going to go sit over there. There's a couple of women over there. I'm going to go chat with them, or they were going to go look at their phone or whatever. But about 50% of the time, I lost the women, right? And it was usually right there with the whole aiming thing, right? Now, I had plenty of cases where the women liked shooting, but they just didn't like aiming, right? So they like taking the gun, pointing it down range, boom, 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 boom. They're not even looking at the sights, right? They just boom, boom, boom. They're enjoying the shooting, but they don't like the aiming. Okay, so that's where I was at. 99% of the time, guys loved it. Only 50% of the time could I get women interested in it. Okay, so I said, okay, that's how it's going to be. I mean, I can't force them, right? So then, about 6 years ago, I started experimenting with red dots on red dots on rifles, right? Then pistol red dots really didn't exist at the time yet. I started experimenting with red dots on rifles, and I went to Amazon. I bought one of those cheap $20 ones, right? Threw it on a .22 rifle. I was basically just experimenting with it, and then I had some of the women try it, and they liked it. I was starting to see like, whoa, whereas before, like, I was losing like 50% of the women, now it was getting closer to like 80-90% of the time the women were liking it. They liked shooting the red dots. So within a month, I'm like, okay, because obviously that $20 red dot wasn't holding zero very well, right? So within a month, I upgraded. I got the Bushnell, right? It was how much was it? It was like, I think $50. It's $50 Bushnell. I got that. I probably worked with that for about a year. My problem with the Bushnell was that on a sunny day, it just was not bright enough. Other problem I had with that was that if you forgot to turn it off, the battery would basically eat up the battery, and you had to, and even if you were remembering to turn it off, it wasn't very efficient, right? It had a very high power consumption level, so I was going through batteries pretty quickly. It wasn't bright enough. So I said, I looked around a little bit. Somebody said, hey, try this Adaball. It's only about $100, $110, something like that. So great, let me try that. It was bright enough. It worked well. I used that for about a year. Only problem with that was that, after a couple of thousand rounds, it started breaking, right? The dial started, it wasn't on all the settings because it had one of those spin dials, but usually on some setting, let's say it was setting 5 or setting 7 or whatever, but at some setting, the connector would start losing connection and it would kind of flicker off. So I'm like, okay, this is working, but I need something a little bit more reliable. Now, you might say, well, why aren't you going straight to, Holosun or something like that? Remember, I'm not convinced at this point that this is worth the investment, right? I'm kind of, because I had learned on iron sights. That's how I had trained. Even a lot of the, because in the early days I had worked a bit with a lot of the combat veterans that were coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, they were all mostly into iron sights. Yes, some of them had shot red dots too. Some of them had, what was it? The ACOGs. But a lot of them, because from the early years, they had only used iron sights. So a lot of the guys were just into iron sights, and that was fine. So I just got into that. So I wasn't convinced that this was the way forward yet. So that's why I didn't really want to put a whole lot of money into it. So little by little, so basically I'm at the point now I got these Adaballs, they're good, but they're breaking. Looked around a little bit more, fell into Howson. First one, dot only. Then the second one I got had that big 65 MOA circle. That was a game changer, right? When I put women on an optic that had the big 65 MOA circle with the dot, now they could come up, find that big circle, put it on a target. They loved it. It was like now I'm starting to get closer to like 98%, 99% of the women that I'm training are loving to shoot rifles. And it doesn't matter if I'm giving them 22s or AR-15s, they're loving it. In the past, I would basically kind of keep them on the 22s because the whole aiming thing was hard enough. I didn't want to give them recoil on top of that. Now I'm putting them straight on AR-15s, straight on AK-47s, right, with red dots on them, and they're hitting the targets. And I'm like, okay, this is the way, and this is the way forward. Women really like shooting this, right? And that's how I became a 100% believer in optics first, and down the road, yeah, we'll teach you iron sights as well, because the purpose of what I'm doing is to bring in new shooters, bring in people that previously didn't know anything about shooting, didn't know that they would like shooting, and turn them into shooters and bring them into our community. And it's my chance of success, all right, is a lot greater if I put people on optics first, especially optics with big windows, right? Like this, the 510C, right? I used to use the smaller tubes. I found an even higher success rate when I use the bigger glass of this house on 510C. Also a great success rate when I use the AR pistols, right? Slightly shorter barrel, so it's a little bit less front heavy. And right now I'm like at a 99 or so % success rate with women. There's very few women that I'll put on a rifle like this, whether it shoots 223 or 9mm, that aren't going to enjoy shooting it. Okay, very few. So I've had a really high success rate with this, and also in the last year I started training people with the optics on the pistols. Also a big game changer, because what had happened was, once I started using the optics on the rifles, I basically steered people mostly to the rifles, and only if I saw that they were really enjoying this and really getting into it would I basically say, okay, let's try some pistols now with some iron sights. But once I started making these polymer 80s, because I decided that these Howson 507s and the slides that were RMR cut, this really, I guess it became a thing like 2 years ago, but it wasn't until last year where it really started catching on, and I could easily buy slides that would take these optics. I started building these polymer 80s, and that was really convenient, because I could build this gun from the ground up, towards my end goal, right, which was to build a gun with an optic that would be fun and easy for women to shoot. And women love shooting this gun. And now that I made them a pink one, right? Oh my God, they see this gun and they're like, we want to shoot this all day. So, going back to the original question, is it better to learn iron sights or shoot optics first? If the goal is to try and grow the community, the pro gun community, as fast as possible, which is my goal, definitely go optics. Bring them in, keep them, and then afterwards, start expanding into other areas. If you go with iron sights first, because that's, the right way to do it, what's going to happen is, in many cases, you're never going to get to the point where you can ever train them on optics, because you're going to lose people. They're going to drop off, especially women. They're going to just fall off. They're not going to develop that love. You put them on optics, especially these Howson with the big circles on them. They get right into it. I find I have a very high success rate. So that's my thoughts. Again, and this is kind of like goal oriented. What's the goal here? Is it to teach people to shoot like World War I and World War II guns, or is it to bring in as many people as fast as possible immediately, because we need them now. We need those people on our side now, not 2 years from now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years. We need them now. So given that my goal is to bring as many people onto our side as quickly as possible, optics first. Bring them in, get them to love the guns, and then down the road you start expanding into other areas. So that's my 2 cents on that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you got any comments of your own, please put them in the comment section. I love hearing from you guys. If you're not a member of the channel, subscribe. Talk to you guys soon.